Hello, and welcome to Community Difference Makers, a conversation powered by Bankers Trust and United Way of Central Iowa. I'm your host, Emily Abbas. Over the past 3 episodes, we've explored childcare from every angle: the big picture systems view, the workforce challenges, and the lived experiences of educators and families that rely on affordable childcare. Today, we're looking ahead. What will it take to build a stronger childcare system for the future? What policy changes, funding strategies, and advocacy efforts can make childcare more accessible, affordable, and sustainable for families, providers, and for employees? Joining us are one of our regular guests here from United Way, Dave Stone. He is the advocacy officer here at United Way of Central Iowa. And joining us also is Jillian Herink. Jillian is executive director, I'm going to get this right here, Iowa Association for the Education of Young Children. Thank you for being here, both of you. Let's just jump right in. We've got a lot to talk about. I know you have a lot of great information to share. Dave, in previous episodes, we've talked about the challenges families and providers face every single day. Why is policy such a critical piece of the childcare puzzle?
Sure. Childcare is a complicated issue, and it is something that requires all sectors on deck: government, nonprofit, business. It's essential for workforce. It's essential for our families. And those types of policies that really move the needle in this space take those coalition, all sector solutions. No one area can do it alone. We've tried that. In fact, United Way of Central Iowa started our advocacy program around childcare all the way back in 2006. So we've been working on this space for 20 years, and there's been a ton of progress, but there's always a lot more room to go. It's just a complicated issue with real market pressures, business pressures. How do you run a profitable center when margins are so tight and slim? And a real world kitchen table issue as well as, hey, the kids need care today. And I need to go to work and I need to get to this place and that place. What are we going to do? Unfortunately, too many people have to make that choice of, do I go to work to pay for childcare? Or do I stay home to save on childcare, which removes that one worker from our workforce? And we've had very perennial workforce shortages in Iowa for years. This is a bread and butter issue on the kitchen table, but this is also for the boardroom as well.
Jillian, from your standpoint, what are you seeing as the biggest policy and funding challenges in Iowa's childcare system right now?
So I think a lot of it has to do with the childcare assistance and the funding formulas that go with that. Ways to bring money into the child care center so that they can staff, feed the children, educate the children, but also keep things affordable for parents. And so the CCA rates, child care assistance rates coming in, they're currently funded by the kids that are enrolled. So if a child misses for an illness or things like that, it's money then that doesn't go to the center or to the home. And they really need that funding to be consistent and to be able to pay their bills as well. Additionally, there's funding for currently a pilot program of childcare assistance that helps people who work in childcare be able to afford childcare for themselves. And we would like that to go into code. It's a pilot. It's been working really well. There's great data around that. And then just the formula itself, the reimbursement rates for childcare assistance are lower than what the cost of care really is. And so those things would be really helpful.
Thanks for outlining those, Dave. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that current funding model and how those fall short for providers, parents, and employers? What else would you like to add?
Well, for the viewers, some folks don't have kiddos anymore, but childcare is the single most expensive item in a typical Iowa family's budget. We always look at a family of 4, 2 adults working, 2 kids in childcare. Average cost for a month is $1,450. That's far outpacing housing costs like rent or mortgage. And these are young families, young kiddos. There's no supports. There's no grant programs, student loans for that age. They have to pay out of pocket. And Jillian mentioned the child care assistance program that the state runs, which is largely funded through both state funds, but also federal funding as well. There's a lot of issues at play, but cost is so exorbitant for families. So we can't just raise the price of childcare because that passes it on to those families. At the same time, there is a workforce problem as well. We can't just build a child care center unless there's a provider there to provide that care. And right now, the average wage for a child care provider in Central Iowa is $13.89 an hour. Think about how many more lucrative opportunities are out there across the board that don't require you to spend 8 hours a day taking care of 8 to 10 toddlers. It's incredibly challenging work, but also really rewarding for the people who are drawn to that work. And so, the cost for families, the low wages, benefits, things for the providers themselves, are kind of in this chicken and an egg. And so a lot can be done in CCA, childcare assistance at the state, but also I encourage, even business community. And there are plenty of examples across the state of businesses stepping up with things like building their own childcare centers for their employees, providing things that we would call dependent care benefits, where you provide a straight up stipend to your employees for either taking care of a kiddo or even potentially an aging or dependent adult as well. So there are lots of solutions, but we always have to refocus folks down to its costs for families and its wages for workers.
And what recent wins show progress at the state or federal level?
We've had a lot of successes in childcare. It's a little bit older now, but one of the big ones was the childcare cliff effect. Folks who are on the childcare assistance program may have been receiving a raise, got more hours at work. That suddenly pushed them over the threshold for being eligible for those benefits. Mm-hmm. But that raise, those extra hours, far and away doesn't help when they go to market rates for childcare. Once they lose those benefits, they can't afford care. So at the time, we were hearing literally employees going to HR directors, don't give me that raise, don't give me those extra hours, because the gap is too big to meet. Thankfully, our legislature and the governor have made a lot of strides in that regard. We have the child care assistance program eligibility up to 250% of the federal poverty level right now. That's one metric the United Way uses in terms of starting to reach stability for a family's budget. And also included a stepped copay scale, preparing families for those market rates. Because again, as I already mentioned, $1,450 a month is a lot for any family of any income level to bear suddenly. There's a lot of flexibilities happening in childcare as well. And there are some proposals coming up that Jillian already mentioned that will be probably looked at during this next legislative session. Things like the childcare reimbursement rates, the pilot program, as you mentioned, paying for enrollment versus attendance is huge. The private childcare setting already does that. You pay, if your kid's going to be in the childcare for 5 days, you're paying for 5 days, whether or not they're sick for 2 or 3 of them. It's not like that in the child care assistance program. And for many of our centers, a kiddo being gone for 2 or 3 days, that could be the difference between them and making payroll or not. These are how tight the margins are. So there's a lot of things that we can do. The state has also done a lot around the child care solutions funds. I think policymakers have finally woken up to that issue over the years now. This is not just a nicety. This is not just about early childhood development or brain development for the kiddos. This is absolutely critical to having a workforce that's ready and able to work. 75% of Iowa's caregivers, everybody's working. If you have kiddos underneath the age of 6, parents and caregivers, 75% of them, both parents are working. Yeah. So when both parents are working and the kiddo has to come home from school at 2 or 3, well, what do you do? And especially in the 0 to 5 space where there's no option, So childcare has a lot more work to be done. A lot of it does have to do with funding, but there are also a lot of innovative local strategies that are being put into place across the state that can be replicated in many other places.
Jillian, anything you want to add to that list of wins?
Dave mentioned quite a few things that I'll bounce off of, but I really think that in Iowa, we have bipartisan support on finding solutions for childcare, both for the parents and families and for the workforce themselves. So we really think of childcare as a really important infrastructure. And we know that a report was done from the U.S. Chamber Foundation and has been updated, and Iowa consistently shows that we lose $1 billion a year in our economy due to breakdowns in childcare. So that's different things of unemployment and loss of taxes and all that. So it makes it critically important for all policymakers to consider finding solutions. Dave mentioned earlier, too, the workforce and the low wages. We did a study on the workforce in 2023. Everything is still relevant. We found that 52% of the people who work in childcare qualify for state assistance. And so if you can't equate the 13-something an hour, when you think about that, it's just not acceptable for a profession to have that low of an income. So it hits everywhere, and really families need relief, childcare workforce needs a solution, and it's the best education for our young children also.
So if our listeners want to help influence policy outcomes, maybe they're parents, maybe they're businesses, maybe they're nonprofits, how can they do that?
I think reaching out to policymakers on those things that are important to you, and knowing that childcare does affect you, whether you have the young children or not, emailing your legislators, joining a coalition, a local coalition, your United Way, having coffee with any of your policymakers. But as Dave mentioned earlier, don't forget about your federal folks, because money comes down to the state for many of the things that are really important to Iowa. So in either including your federal folks on your email or connecting with them when they come to town and letting them know where your priorities are is really important as well.
Great advice. Dave, how does childcare policy align with workforce development needs? Something else that our community's really focused on.
We talked about a little bit here, but Iowa is perennially in a workforce shortage. And when site selectors come to look, potentially in a rural area or even in an urban area, childcare is one of the things that they're looking at. Yeah. Because when you're trying to invite a new business, a new manufacturer, what have you, you're going to draw a new set of workforce. And that workforce, if they're picking up and moving from another state, another community, they're not bringing an extended family with them. It's the immediate family and the kiddos. So what does that mean? Well, you're plopped in a brand new town that you don't know. You don't know anybody around you. There is no mom, uncle, grandpa to take care of the kiddo for free or low cost. And you don't have community yet to go, hey, neighbor down the street, can you watch my kiddo? Childcare is incredibly important for you to draw that workforce. And I know there's plenty of examples of businesses recognizing that. Also recognizing that sometimes solutions can be as simple as flexibility. How do the shifts start for a manufacturer, first, second, third shift? Well, maybe their parents have to do a switcheroo with those kiddos, and there's a gap of an hour where the kids are unsupervised. That isn't good. So, again, childcare is necessary and critical for people to be able to work in Iowa, just the way, cost of living is and the nature of all parents have to be working. And I always bring it back to, these are young families just starting out, 0 to 5 years old. They've just come through out of the, maybe the terrible twos, what have you. There's just not many supports for them, especially if they're high. And this really cuts across all income levels. Mm-hmm. Childcare assistance obviously is limited to those with moderate to low income, but anybody of any means spending this kind of money, it hurts. Mm-hmm. And absorbing those costs means sacrifices. Yeah. Something different can't be paid for if you're spending double your mortgage on childcare every month.
Yeah. And even just finding those spots.
Yes.
I mean, even years ago, just the idea of, oh, you're pregnant, you better get your name on a list for 3 different childcare centers right now. And
exactly.
You're like,
you're late. You're pregnant. You're already late to get on the list.
Late. Okay. Jeez. United Way plays a big role in moving systems change forward. Talk a little bit more about how that ties to this work in childcare.
Childcare, again, was the start of our advocacy program going back to 2006. And really, it was led by our volunteers, our donors, and our advocates. Our Women United, formerly Women's Leadership Connection, is a group of women who put their own dollars on the line and then help make investment decisions in the community. And one of those things that they have always, perennially invested in is childcare. Mm-hmm. And they realized we're kind of throwing good money after bad. if we're just writing an investment check to this childcare center, but not really addressing the overall system. And so that's why they made the first steps of getting up to the Capitol, putting together a coalition, starting conversations with policymakers. And it's really where it's led to a full advocacy program now where we work across all of our 5 issue areas in United to Thrive. But childcare is one of those absolutely critical, essential needs to, again, allow folks to go get that education, go get that new job, make sure the budget and the household budget balances as well. Those are tough choices for families, especially when, as we said, you're pregnant, get on the list.
Yeah.
Does a parent stay home? Does a parent, do you put your kid in childcare so that they can go to work? These are tough, life-changing decisions in those first spaces of life. I wouldn't also be remiss if I don't mention the incredibly important time frame we're talking about. 0 to 5 is where the most brain development is happening for our kiddos. You, like I see, can talk about that. That's when the brain's being rewired. And that's setting up the kid up for success in terms of school readiness. Really, in our terms, we think about it of cradle to career. Workforce development starts in infancy because we're developing the kiddos who are going to go to school. Then we're developing those kiddos going to be the next workforce in 18 to 20 years. And so there's important focus that needs to be paid there because we're not just plopping kids down in front of the TV and calling that childcare. There has to be enrichment and experience. They are getting school ready so that when they hit kindergarten, they have those social emotional skills to be successful. And so, quality, affordable childcare is really the stage there. And I know, Jillian, you can go on and on about that. So.
Well, I would just like to add when Dave was talking about young families moving and looking for childcare, one of the first things they do is check out the school district also, but they're looking for quality childcare for just those reasons he stated. It's a really important time for brain development and for children to learn self-regulation so that they can be contributing members to the community later in their adult life. So it's very important that they have quality care by a trained professional. And I think one of the things we struggle with the most, but the state has done a lot of work in, is training the workforce and having programs that help the workforce go back to college and get more training, but also get a livable wage. Out of our agency, we have a TEACH program, pays for people working in the field to go to college. And we have the wages program that pays people extra money because of the poverty wages they're getting to stay working in childcare. And those types of incentives are really important to keep going to impact the quality for care.
So you're both difference makers, and I'm sure your heads are full of just lots of ideas. If you could change one thing about Iowa's childcare system in the next year, what would make the biggest difference? Who wants to start?
I think we've already mentioned a few things here, and these are active and live policy proposals. Moving the state's child care assistance program from attendance-based to enrollment-based would be really a paradigm shift for our centers. Those are active proposals. We would love to see that. That's how the private child care center ecosystem already functions. But we're talking about, the lower income centers that are taking the need in and, again, not being paid even close to market rate. Now, we appreciate the rates that they're at, and those things are also being addressed potentially in this next session. However, anything we can do to stabilize childcare centers, because they are incredibly important they're the infrastructure behind everything else. And, one kiddo missing, one teacher calling in sick, these are the things that put a center from the black into the red. And then that destabilizes that center. And then think about how many families it impacts if that center ends up closing. And we've had stories of, folks driving from the north part of central Iowa to the south part of central Iowa every day just to save a couple $100 every week on childcare. That's an hour and a half in the car in the morning, hour and a half in the car in the evening, and then you're going to work as well. So you can see that this is like an issue that we really need to focus and address on. I think the pain on enrollment versus attendance is one of those things that we can kind make the playing field level for all childcare centers. And we tried it in the pandemic. It was a pandemic era relief, but it expired.
Okay.
And what we heard from our childcare centers was this was incredibly invaluable and important for us, because then they can budget and plan for revenues and also plan staffing for the need. Because we've had centers where a couple kiddos are missing, and again, they can't make payroll that month. And, that sort of insolvency, we need to strengthen these centers as best we can in those regards.
Mm-hmm. And for our side on the workforce, we need to professionalize the childcare workforce more and respect it more. We have many childcare providers. Not only are they making poverty wages, but they might not have any access to benefits or retirement funding or anything. We've shared stories of providers who lost a spouse and didn't have leave to go to, bury their own spouse. And so what profession does that that's so critical to a community and to a state other than childcare? And so if we could figure out a way to fund the things that are in our recommendations, which is part of our ask to the legislators, to make it more of a solid field and a solvent field so that those providers can feed their own families and still contribute to the brain building for the 0 to 5 population.
And that's all in line with what we've just heard from in our last few episodes when we're talking to those running childcare centers throughout Central Iowa, those that are working the front lines. How do we make this a more respectable and profession that we can really invest in, and giving them the same training and tools that other jobs have? They just don't have the same resources, do they? Right. Well, to wrap us up, we've talked a lot about what's broken and what needs to change. As advocates that work in this space every day, what gives each of you hope that Iowa can actually build a more stable, sustainable childcare system? And where are you seeing momentum right now?
Well, during my tenure in this role with United Way, I have seen a lot of progress made. I would say the biggest thing was in the mind shifting of policymakers, business leaders, the community around this work. And just that big shift in thinking allowed us to start really making progress in this space. Lots more room to grow, but it's not just seen as an issue can be pushed off to the side. I think it's been centered now to the conversation. We've talked about it in terms of the importance to workforce or to families themselves. It's critically important, and that shift was huge, monumental. We didn't make much progress at all until folks really that clicked over for them. What makes me hopeful as well is seeing that collaboration happening. Government, nonprofit, business, they are working together. They're sharing ideas. They're collaborating in ways they've never done before. And I always love it. Skin is in the game. We're not just talking about niceties. There's funding involved as well. And as we have these conversations, as communities come together to solve their very local childcare problems, there's plenty of opportunity for us to expand these programs to all areas of the state. And so I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful.
What makes me hopeful is when the business owners start talking about childcare and asking advocates like we are about solutions and what they can do because they can't get a workforce or they can't keep a workforce or their workforce is calling in absent. That skin in the game, as Dave says, is really critical to lift their voices. Families only have young children for a period of time, so they might be very active advocates, but then their children grow up. Or grandparents might be caring for children for just a little time. But the businesses always need employees. So I'm really hopeful with the partnership, as Dave mentioned before, that there are community-driven solutions that also now include economic development, workforce development, and the business owners. And they're asking us questions, and they're asking the providers questions. And I think that's what it takes, is many minds to solve it.
We haven't given many shout outs in this season of Community Difference Makers, but this one begs one. I'll give one to Ben McLean, who's CEO and president of Ruan Transportation Management, also owned by the Ruan family that owns Bankers Trust. And Ben, I know, has just been a big advocate for more childcare resources downtown and in downtown Des Moines. And we know, and we've heard they need them everywhere, but that's an example of just a business leader stepping up and helping out and knowing that his workforce needs this support as well. Well, thank you both for sharing your experiences and your expertise. Today's conversation reminds us that childcare isn't just a family issue. It's an economic issue, a workforce issue, a community issue. Policy change is how we move from short-term fixes to long-term solutions. I've learned so much today. I've learned that childcare costs more than sending a kid to college, $1,450 per month. Wow. We've learned about the cliff effect. How often do you hear about people turning down raises? And this is happening every single day so that they can still qualify for low-income childcare. We talked about moving it from attendance-based to enrollment-based reimbursements and the importance of that, and as a hopeful solution out there. So thank you to United Way. Thank you to our partners. Thank you for building advocacy efforts to make these issues more affordable and sustainable. They can't do it alone, though. So listeners, here's our shout out to you. Advocate for policies that support families and providers. Join coalitions pushing for systemic change, and learn more about all of these important topics at unitedwaydm.org/childcare. Reach out to your politicians, local and federal, when they're in town. Ask them to coffee, ask them for help. Let them know what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. That wraps up our childcare series, but we're not done tackling critical community issues. Next, we'll turn to youth violence and United Way's Safe and Thriving Youth Initiative. This launched a community-led plan last January to keep kids safe and engaged. With more than a quarter of Central Iowa youth reporting that they don't feel safe at school, more than a quarter don't feel safe at school. This is a conversation that we all need to have. So join us next time as we explore what it'll take to build safer environments and brighter futures for our youth. Thanks to Dave and Jillian for being with us today. Again, I'm Emily Abbas with Bankers Trust. Thanks for listening to Community Difference Makers. When we come together around a shared purpose, we don't just talk about change, we make it happen. Let's all go out and make it happen.